I'm super happy to welcome everyone. My name is Alyssa. I am a second-year PhD student in computer science. I know most of you are psych people, so I will try to hit on some psych stuff. If you have any questions that I can't answer, because it's like discipline specific, feel free to ask your student mentor. They're like an awesome person to ask. I also was part of the committee that put all this together, so I'm super excited to see everyone here. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so this morning we'll start off with an overview of the PhD application process, since I figure that most of you, all of you, are thinking about PhD programs. Feel free to pop in with questions, but let's save the longer discussions for the end. Okay, so I guess you're trying to apply to PhD programs, but before you do that, a few things to consider. PhD admissions are pretty tough. You're going to want to have a backup plan. Backup plans can look different for many different people. It might be a master's instead of a PhD program. Sometimes there is an option to go from the master's to a PhD program, so another thing to consider. You might consider going into full-time employment, and that might look different for everyone. It might be industry, it might be some other field. You might do a post-bac, which is kind of like another program you do after your bachelor's. Another thing to think about is finances. So people don't always talk about it, but a PhD program is a pretty big financial decision. You are paid a stipend. Not everyone knows this, but the school essentially pays you to come to school, but the stipend is not always huge. So think about stipend, think about benefits such as health insurance or whatever else the school might offer. Your personal situation, if you have savings, if you have debt, and also think about external support, such as family support. Finally, when you're looking into PhD programs, it's better to look as deep as possible. I know for undergrad, a university reputation is kind of one of the biggest things you look at, but in a PhD program, your relationship with your advisor is one of the most important things. So you're going to want to look at individual departments and even individual professors. I also like to recommend that people look at the students that the professors are advising, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of all the different things people work on. It's not always just what the advisor is interested in. People will branch out and do lots of different stuff. And the last two questions you always need to ask yourself are, why do you want a PhD, and do you actually need it? This is going to be personal to everyone, and you might also want to ask around to get some inspiration, but you don't always need a PhD, so it's a long investment. So just be informed about your decisions. So I'm going to go through a general timeline and then give you guys some more specific suggestions on organizing the PhD application process. So the first thing to know is that PhD applications are usually due in mid-December, around the December 15th area. Fellowship applications are actually due earlier, in about mid-October. I'll talk more about fellowship applications later. Fellowship is basically some external funding that you can get. It's always nice to have some extra money. The GRE is the standardized exam for graduate admissions. It's like the SAT of grad school. It's not always required. These days, the GRE requirement is going away, but if you do want to take it or need to take it, you'll want to give yourself time to study, time to take it, and then time for scores to be delivered. So the absolute latest that you can take the GRE is about 2 to 3 weeks before your application deadline. And of course, you might want to think about taking it twice or something like that. I took it twice if you're not happy with your score the first time around. That'll be like kind of the most flexible thing. And the last thing you need to think about is recommendation letters. You'll need about 3. If that stresses you out, I actually have a workshop coming up today on recommendation letters, so don't worry about that for now. And you'll want to give your writers at least a month in advance notice. Okay, all that said, here's a more specific timeline to help you get organized. I applied for PhD programs when I was a senior in college, so it's going to be a pretty good fit if you're in that same situation. I'm hoping that if you're not applying at the same time that I was applying, it'll still be helpful. So anytime from January to September, you should take your GRE and be happy with your score, submit it. In the summer, before you submit your application, you want to start preparing to apply. Don't stress out too much if you're applying now and you didn't really start. It's okay. It's just a recommendation. Some things that you can do are start looking at schools and programs, prepare your CV, brainstorm some ideas for any personal statements or research proposals that you have to write. You can also try contacting potential advisors. I did not do this because it was scary, but you can. It is not so bad of an idea. And if any of these preparation things are scary, don't worry, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later, and we also have a writing workshop on the personal statement coming up today. So once you start school, kind of the early fall semester area, August to October, you can start asking for recommendation letters and prepare for fellowship applications. So you don't have to apply for fellowships. I am going to talk about that soon. But if you are applying for fellowships, you'll want to ask for recommendation letters around this time. And in October, submit your fellowship apps if you are doing it. Then from October to December, you can prepare for your PhD program applications. One good thing about applying for fellowship applications is that you can kind of transform those materials into PhD program application materials. Then in December, you can submit your PhD program applications and celebrate that you did it. January through February, you wait in agony as people get back to you and maybe schedule interviews, maybe tell you a decision. And in March and April, you wait with some more agony as you get fellowship notifications. But basically after January, it's just a bunch of waiting and seeing and hopefully getting invited to admitted student days and whatnot. Any questions so far? All right. So more about fellowships and why you should apply to them. The way that funding works in graduate school is, at least for me, professors' grants will fund you, which means that you will need to do work related to that grant, and sometimes you need to do work for that grant. So there might be like evals and stuff that you need to do. If you get external funding in the form of a fellowship, it frees you from being paid by that grant, which gives you a little bit more research flexibility. It also looks great on your CV. It's also a discount for the school because the school no longer has to pay for you. They can use that money for something else. So basically everyone wins if you get a fellowship, which is why you should apply for them. We also have some funding resources and a funding workshop coming up tomorrow if you would like some more information about that. So here are the parts of the application you should pay attention to. There is an application fee of about $100. It's like plus or minus 20 maybe. There are also fee waivers available, so if this is a burden to you, you should definitely ask one of the admissions committee members. You'll need a CV or resume, a personal statement, statement of purpose, or research proposal. So these are kind of the three meaty essays that you'll need to write. They are sometimes combined in like one document. They'll say something like, tell us about your motivations and research goals. That these are kind of the three different terms that people will often use to talk about what you need to write. And this is field dependent, but you also might need to do interviews. So more about the oh yeah.
How in depth is the research proposal? Is it just basically like a skim of some of your ideas, or is it what does it consist of?
Yeah, very good question. So the question was, how in depth does your research proposal have to go? And in my experience, research proposals have been more common on fellowship applications, not PhD program applications. And I like to think of it as demonstrating that you can come up with a research idea. So you'll want to come up with a research question that's not too broad, not too specific. Demonstrate that you can look up relevant literature and cite data and methods and other resources that you'll use to do your research. And then talk about what are some of your expected results. What would you do if something went wrong? How would this help the scientific community and maybe even the rest of the world? It does not have to be like a fully done out research proposal. It's probably around 2 to 3 pages, single spaced. And you don't always have to stick to it. It's kind of more of a demonstration that I can do this. And if you end up changing your mind or finding something new later, that should be fine.
So if you get the fellowship, get a stipend?
Oh, okay. Okay, another good question. So what happens to your stipend if you get a fellowship? You will still get a stipend. Sometimes the fellowship is lower than the school stipend, but the school should kind of top it off to give you the minimum amount. So the minimum you'll make is whatever the school decides that they give all their students. And sometimes they'll give you a bonus if you get a fellowship to encourage you to apply to stuff like that. It kind of doesn't matter to the student, like you're going to get money from someone anyway. It just kind of matters to the school where the money is coming from. You will still get a stipend. Yeah?
I do have a question. Let's say you do get the fellowship, but let's say you don't get a spot in the doctoral program. Do you like tell the faculty member, oh, I got the fellowship, can I get like a spot? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, what if you get a fellowship but you don't get admitted to PhD programs? First of all, fellowship applications are even tougher than PhD applications. So if you get a fellowship, I have a good feeling you're going to get in somewhere. And that is actually a pretty good idea. If you get a fellowship and there's a program that you really want to get into, you can reach out and say, hey, I got this fellowship, could you reconsider me? It doesn't always work, but I don't think it hurts to ask. Yep.
Are the fellowships offered by the specific university that you're applying for or from some other institution?
Cool, yeah, so the question was who gives people fellowships? And there is a large variety of funding sources. For early career PhD students, such as me and like all of you guys, the NSF is a really big one. So government is a really big one. There's also, in my field, a lot of people are funded by the DoD, so National Science Foundation and Department of Defense, and various government agencies. There are also some like kind of, I guess they're nonprofit organizations that will fund you. There are some school fellowships, so sometimes the university will offer a special fellowship and they'll have students apply, and that's good because the money comes from some other budget instead of your professor's budget, something like that. So there's a wide variety of sources. Definitely check out our website for some more. I can rattle off some names right now, but I feel like that would be not helpful. So definitely talk to me later if you're interested. Yeah.
We'll talk about them more in the funding workshop too, and we'll have some links to some that you can look for.
Yeah, and Risla's running the funding workshop, so another excellent person to ask questions. Yeah.
So when you get a fellowship, are PIs like less invested in your projects and just not dependent on their own grants, or is it?
Ooh, interesting. So what I said before was if you get a fellowship, then you wouldn't be funded by your PI's grants. Therefore, is your PI less interested in you? I would say no, because you are your PI's baby. They want you to do well. When you do well, they do well. So I would say they would be very happy for you to get paid by someone else, and they would be very happy for you to do well. So I would say no, they would not be less invested in you. They would be equally happy. Yeah.
Is it likely that for international students, the chances of applying to a fellowship would be relatively scarce?
Interesting. So the question was opportunities for international students. So there are, I am more aware of fellowships for US citizens and residents. So there might be less opportunities to apply, but I think that of the ones that accept international students, I don't think they would count that against you. Other questions? Super awesome, everyone. Thanks so much. Okay, so more about the CV and resume. So I think many people already have a resume. It's kind of like a one-page document, summary of very relevant career stuff. A CV is like an extended resume. It can take up multiple pages. It will cover the full scope of your career, not just the most important stuff. You can add more descriptions and stuff like that in your CV that might be missing from your resume. And some information you might want to include are education. So your bachelor's is super important. Anything after that, you can leave off high school. Research experience, so any projects you've worked on, maybe you don't have formal research experience and you want to put on some stuff that you did for class, can also work out, especially when you're early career. Work experience, if you've done internships, if you've had a job, volunteer service, pretty self-explanatory. If you've gotten fellowships or scholarships, that would be really good for funding. And if you've gotten any awards, honors, recognitions, also throw them on there. The personal statement. So the personal statement is personal. It's about you, which can be kind of scary. I wasn't very used to talking about myself when I applied, so this was a little bit overwhelming to me. But no worries, we're gonna have a writing workshop all about the personal statement. You're gonna wanna talk about your skills, your interests, your preparation to pursue those interests, and your past experience related to those interests. So what does this mean? It means saying, I am interested in this thing, I am interested in it because of this, and I am prepared to do it because of that. It might look like, I was really inspired by this class. I took this class, I have experience in doing research here. I have experience reading about this, I have experience living about this. Sometimes it's combined with a research statement. It might be more of a statement of purpose, like what are my goals to get done and how am I prepared to do it? And you're gonna wanna tailor your personal statement to the application. So you'll want to have like a paragraph or whatever dedicated to the particular program you're interested in. And that might look something like, I'm really interested in such and such program because of this lab. I'm very interested in working with this professor because of their work in that. Try to be specific, do your research, and really help the people reading your application visualize you in their spot, in their school, interacting with people, and just doing well. Then we have the research statement. So this research statement is about your research. Depending on your application, you might not actually have to, yeah.
Just for the personal statement, is that, how specific does that interest look like? Like, would you say like, I'm specifically interested in looking at this specific link between, I don't know, like couples and stress, or is it more like, I'm interested in relationship psychology and here's why?
Yeah, so in your personal statement, when you're talking about your research interests, I guess I would say more specific is better. But if you don't have a super specific idea, that's also okay, because how are you going to know what you're interested in before you kind of actually do it? So definitely try to narrow it down, but it doesn't have to be like, here's my dissertation project, especially because it's probably going to change by the time you actually do your dissertation. Other questions about the personal statement? Mm-hmm.
I know we might go over like specific formatting in the workshop, but are all these like single space, double space?
I don't quite remember. That's a good question. I think the application usually will say, I think I did mine single spaced. This was another thing that surprised me because I was like so used to undergrad applications, but they, I think, just have you upload a PDF. So you write it up about 2 to 3 pages, single spaced, I believe, 12-point font, something standard like that. You upload it to their website and somebody reads it. It's not very strict. Yeah. Other questions? Fellowship applications will be super strict, and they'll have everything like lined out, and they'll say, I want this in 11-point font and that in 10-point font. Margins have to be 1 inch or whatever. They'll be very specific. Cool. Okay, research statement. So I did talk about this a little when I answered somebody's question, but the research statement is kind of just a summary, a demonstration that you can figure out what to do. You don't have to actually do it. So the steps I like to take are to, 1, scope out a question. Not too broad, not too specific. Then you want to go through some literature and say, well, this person did that. Here is a method that I could use. Here is some data that I could use. Then you want to say, all right, so now that I've got my data and I've got my methods, I would apply them in this way, and I would expect to see this. And if I don't see that, I would try to address it by doing this other thing. I know this is all kind of vague, but we all have lots of different interests, and I think this kind of framework can help structure your research statement. And then you would say, based on these results, I would do this, and this is helpful because. that's kind of what goes into a research statement. And again, this is more common in fellowship applications than PhD applications. PhD applications tend to ask, like, what are you interested in, not necessarily how are you going to do it. Question?
Yeah, when you're writing up your research statement, you mentioned like this is the data I produce. Are you like expected to cite relevant literature for your research statement?
Yeah, okay, so citations in your research statement. I've only had to do research statements for fellowship applications, and in those fellowship applications, I did cite about 4 papers, so not a huge amount. And it also wasn't like a formal citation. It was more like in a footnote, very tiny font. I put like the authors and the link and the title, something like that. It does not have to be super intensive. And for my essays for PhD applications, I didn't cite anything. I just said, this is what interested me. I learned about this, along those lines.
Thank you.
Did I see another question over here? Mm-hmm.
I've heard the advice for personal statements that you should really address 3 questions: why here, why you, why now? And to mean that, like, why are you the person who can make this happen? Why is this institution the place to do it? And why do you have to pursue a PhD this year? Would you agree with that?
I would say that's a pretty good starting point. So thinking about personal statements, why here, why you, why now? Those are some pretty good guiding points. Maybe you don't have to strictly stick to them. I think it's a good starting point. And it is a good way to start brainstorming, you know, what exactly am I talking about when you have a blank document, you have no idea what to say. I think it's a good starting point. Other questions? All right, onwards. Interviews, a little bit about interviews. So not every discipline does interviews, and of course not every discipline does interviews in the same way. If you are in a particular discipline that doesn't really do interviews, and then you don't get interview requests, don't worry about it, because it's just not a thing. Computer science does not really do interviews. It's not really common. Is the mic on? Is it working now? Can you hear her?
As long as they can hear you.
It's your
But it's not over. As long as everyone can hear you, that's fine.
Okay, that's odd.
Something's probably just the news.
Strange. Okay, I will just try to project them. Okay, so I do know that interviews are more common in psychology, which I feel is an interest to many people here, so I'll try to talk more in depth about them. So the most common thing, the most conventional thing, I guess I would say, is to have a giant interview weekend. They'll pick some people that they like, they'll bring you to campus, and you just kind of have a huge long day of talking to various professors, and they'll ask you questions like, what are you interested in? Why are you interested in that? How much do you know about my lab? And whatnot. You'll have to get all dressed up in some business casual-esque thing. A new thing that seems to be more common is a pre-interview. So this is more casual. It might be done online. Before they even read your application, someone might reach out to you and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about you. I don't know if there's like a really strong correlation between getting a pre-interview and getting accepted or getting into this interview weekend. But I would say that it's a pretty good sign. If someone wants to talk to you more, they are probably more interested rather than less interested. If you don't get this pre-interview request, honestly, don't think too much about it. It's hard to tell what goes on. Just know that sometimes it exists. Also know that you can also ask questions. You should know things about the program that you're applying to and possibly joining eventually. You can ask questions like, how many students do you have? What do your funding sources look like? What are some projects going on in your lab right now? What is the culture like amongst your students? What are some of the course requirements for PhD programs? You know, and this later can help you kind of compare and contrast various programs you might be choosing between. Cool. All right. Happy day. You're accepted. Now what do you do? ask as many questions as possible. Particularly try to ask students because they'll have a different perspective from your professors. You're going to want to ask about department culture, research, resources, what are people working on, are people happy there, what is it like socially, would you fit in with people, like maybe you're a very social person and other people are more laid back. Maybe it's the other way around. You're going to want to be happy wherever you end up. And it's not always like a good or bad thing, it's just a, does this suit me or does it not? Think about finances again. This is a good time to ask about the student stipend and any benefits that the program offers. You also want to compare that to the cost of living. So the cost of living in some place like New York is going to be way higher than the cost of living of some place like more rural. You can ask about typical rent in the area. People might give you a range. Utilities, groceries, what's expensive, what's not expensive, how do people save money. You can also look for other possible support. Sometimes there are like other grants. Some schools will offer, you know, like Penn offers 50% off dental insurance, so like there's kind of those kinds of things that may exist. And definitely talk to other students and potential advisors. I said before that your fit is the most important thing. PhD programs are very like highly individualized. So you're gonna want to make sure that you are gonna be happy where you end up. But of course now we have to think about, boo, I didn't get in. Again, now what? First of all, try not to take it too personally. I know that's tough, but PhD applications are insanely competitive. And sometimes stuff happens that we just have no way of knowing, and it's not always about you. A story I like to tell is in my undergrad, the sub-discipline that I was involved in accepted 0 students that year. Why? 0 people were qualified? No, that's not true. It's because one professor was on sabbatical and one professor was on paternity leave. There's like literally 0 people who could accept people. That happens, you don't know it happens, you wouldn't know before applying. So just shake it off. Consider your backup options. Are you gonna go for that full-time job? Are you gonna try for a master's and apply again later? Are you gonna do a post-bac program? Are you gonna do a research program? A fellowship like a Fulbright or whatever? There are other options out there. And if you want to apply again, take a bit of time, take a breath, and then think about, hey, what in my application could be strengthened? Did I not have such good recommendation letters? Are my courses not looking too strong? Do I need more research experience? Do I want to work on some more publications? These are all good things to consider. Try again in a year, or maybe try again a little while later. That's perfectly fine. Great, everybody. Yeah, questions? Yes?
So, if we do get rejected, will they give us kind of like a reason, or will they say, like, especially if you had a good rapport with the professor and you kind of thought like they were, I don't want to say leading you on, but they kind of made it seem like you were a good candidate. So is it appropriate to ask why we didn't get it, or will they just automatically give us the feedback?
Yeah, okay. So feedback when it comes to rejections. I think rejections usually come in the standard template email. So sorry, we had such a strong application pool this year, we weren't able to accept you. If you did talk to a professor and you ended up not getting accepted, even though that's what you expected, I would say, yeah, it's perfectly acceptable to reach out and say, like, I was really interested, could you let me know what, what consideration went into my rejection. Sometimes it's a matter of funding. People just don't have the money to hire a new student. It actually costs about $80,000 per year to fund a single PhD student because it includes paying you and then paying the university for tuition and whatnot. So sometimes it's just a matter of money. It might not be a matter of you. Other questions? All right, thanks so much, everybody.